Hi, this is Luke from Corniff Audio. Both Dan and I feel it's really important that people understand engineering and have a good way of thinking about the techniques involved in engineering and the devices involved in engineering. And we got a question from a person who bought the pawn shop comp about a lot of different applications for it. But one of the things that was critical to him was using it on vocals. So I'm going to, in this edition of Classic Track Mixover, I'm going to be working with a Bowie lead vocal. And in this video, I'm going to look at compression on a vocal using the pawn shop comp, but also discuss some of the ideas behind using a compressor on a vocal, what you're trying to do with that, and some ways of thinking about a compressor in general. So without any further ado, this is one of the great Bowie tracks. Now that's Bowie screwing around. One of the things that's really cool about this particular track, most of the time when you find isolated vocals online, they're done with a plugin or they're pulled off with that game, Rockstar, I guess. Very rarely does someone get their hands on a studio master and pull the lead vocal off. That is exactly what we have here. This is the lead vocal of Space Oddity with no processing, just the lead vocal. But we're screwing around. Now listen right here. He's tapping the sides of his mouth with his fingers. But if you listen to that melody, da da da, he's doing the beginning of Starman, which I think is incredibly cool. That is Starman. All right, so this vocal was probably cut with probably like a U67 in this time, and it was compressed going to tape. Now it's very, very common, and in fact, you almost have to compress vocals going to tape or going to your DAW, going to digital, whatever it might be, because you don't want the vocal overloading and causing clipping. You can not use a compressor, and especially if you have a very well-trained singer, you might be able to get away with that without a problem. But it's very, very common to compress a vocal going as you record it, and then also compress it when you go to mix. So if you notice, this is the quiet part at the beginning of the song, and you can see that it's actually a little quieter in terms of the level than this later part. And that is because they're using a compressor in here, but just barely. And it sounds like a tube compressor to me. Just enough in this area that it probably just touches on every now and then. And then, of course, when he gets louder, it kicks in much more. So this is kind of how you'd want to set a compressor when you're tracking. You're looking to even things out. You don't want the loud things tremendously louder than the quiet things. And that's not even talking about the way a compressor might change something.
Ground control to Major Tom. Ground control to Major Tom.
So you can hear his headphone leakage there.
Take your protein pills and put your helmet on.
Phenomenal vocal, no punch-ins.
Ground control to Major Tom.
Now, you right in there, you might hear Tom, like it sounds like an echo on.
Major Tom.
But it's not quite in time. I think that's print through. That's a phenomena with analog tape where when you had the tape wound up, the magnetic information would pass from layer to layer. And to prevent that from happening before a sound, you'd wind the tape a certain way so it sounds after. But with the rest of the mix, you're not even going to hear any of that. But on this vocal, you're going to hear it. I'm going to go to where he gets louder. Bowie breathing. Little noise. And you're going to hear the compressor kick in a lot more.
This is ground control to Major Tom. You've really made the grade. And the papers want to know whose shirts you wear.
So that's being heavily compressed now by the compressor kicking in. So I'm going to bring up the pawn shop real quick here. I don't think, yeah. It's pretty much out of circuit right now. I'm just going to pop in the auto makeup gain because why not make life a lot easier? I'm going to zoom in on a waveform here. I'm saying so a lot. I'm going to zoom in on a waveform. And I'm going to show you some cool things. All right, so here is a waveform. And this beginning area, this is the attack area of a waveform, and then this is the sustain and release areas of a waveform. And you're going to notice that in some cases, we have waveforms with a fairly steep attack. Let me see if I can get in a little closer. Fairly steep attack, and right, that's pretty steep. And in other cases, that attack is more rounded off. It's really kind of hard to nudge it for a tiny little bit. See, this is a little more rounded off here, a little steeper there, rounded off there. So this is, this opening of the attack is generally on a vocal. It's the t, t, s, s, p, p, t, those noises at the beginning of a word or a phrase. So if I say phrase, that f is the beginning of the attack of it. And that's going to be right here. So let's just see if we can hear some of that and see some of that.
Though I'm past 100,000 miles,
So right, there's not a lot of attack there. So you don't really get a very steep waveform there. Let me just scroll this back. Oh, I'm using the zoom. All right. So this is going to, I'm screwing around now. I'm such a moron. Where are we? Okay. So let's just see this again. Duh.
though I'm past 100,000 miles, I'm feeling very still. And I think
So I'm going to pop in here that and, right? And there's not a lot of attack on and I think, right? So you can kind of see the transients on this.
And I think
And I, so there's the D, and I think, and then there's the my, and it's got I feel like speech therapist, and it's got an M, which doesn't have a fast attack compared to a T. So one of the things you want to look out for when you're compressing a vocal is what are your, what's happening to your transients when the compressor's in. So I'm going to put I'm just going to run the pawn shop here a little bit.
though I'm past 100,000 miles, I'm feeling very still. And I think my spaceship knows which way to go.
Okay, so in there you have a pretty good idea of the transients. Now I'm going to set the attack very fast. Now what this is going to do, you're going to notice the meter jumping a lot more, but it's going to be clipping the transients out. It's actually going to be kicking in faster. And you're going to notice that the T's and D's and the transients are kind of rounded off and they're not quite as clear.
And I think my spaceship knows which way to go. Tell my wife I love her very much. She knows. And I think...
Let me go back a little bit this way.
though I'm past one...
So you hear that though is kind of like almost a... So you don't even really hear much of that T.
though I'm past 100,000 miles, I'm feeling very still.
Now I'm going to slow the attack down, let more of that transient through, and you're going to notice that you're going to hear those attacks better. The whole sound is going to be a little brighter, and it's going to have a lot more life to it, a lot more high end.
Though I'm past 100,000 miles, I'm feeling very still. And I think my spaceship knows which way to go.
Can you hear the difference in there? Here's with the attack set fast.
The spaceship knows which way to go.
Like the to go sounds more like to go with the fast attack. So one of the things you want to do is make sure your attack is set a little on the slow side for a vocal, just enough to get those nice transients through so your vocal is nice and bright and is very intelligible. Now, the release acts on the opposite side, on the opposite end of the signal. So if we look at this, the compressor kicks in at the beginning, and that's going to be controlled by the attack, how much it kicks in. And then as it goes into the release area, the compressor will either stay in longer or come out quicker. Now, if it comes out quicker, what it tends to do is bring up that quiet stuff that's in between tracks, and things like mouth noise, like all that little noisy mouth stuff, that will get louder. Breaths will get louder. In some cases, if there's ambiance in the room, that will get louder if you set the release really fast. If you set the release slower, you're not going to bring up that stuff as much. And the vocal will have, to my ears, it has less detail, but it will sound a little more natural. Let me see if I can find a spot where we've got some quiet stuff here, and we'll play with the release.
Knows which way to go. Tell my wife I love her very much. She knows.
Okay, so in there, we have bleed we can listen to, and also there's that breath. So if I set this release on the long side, it's going to hold that stuff down, and it's not going to be quite as noticeable. Hopefully this will be fairly audible. I'm going to whack the compressor way out here.
Tell my wife I love her very much. She knows. Ground control.
Okay, so now I'm going to set the release really fast, and you're going to hear that quiet stuff come popping up.
Tell my wife I love her very much. She knows.
So did you hear that breath pop up? Let me just do the breath.
Very much. Very much.
Very much. And if I put the release in,
very much. She knows.
so you can holds that breath down quite a bit more. There's even a spot I found on this. I think it's where we actually can hear.
And I think.
I hit the wrong button.
Though I'm past 100.
Okay, right in here, it sounds like there's a little echo on the room, and it's maybe he's a little bit off mic, but you can hear the echo of the room here.
Though I'm past 100,000 miles.
Now I'm going to set the compressor to see if I can bring out that room. This is really not a great way to hear this. You'll probably hear a little bit of it.
Though I'm past 100,000.
Actually, that's pretty considerable. You can hear a lot of the room coming up.
Though I'm past 100.
Hear the echo on his voice now, and I can suppress that with the release.
Though I'm past 100,000 miles.
Okay, so manipulating your attack and your release, you're working on how much you hear of this beginning part of a sound and how much you hear of this end part of the sound. One of the things you can do is you can think about how intimate you want that vocal to be. If you want that vocal to sound a little further away and be a little less in your face, I'm backing off the mic now, so you don't hear the noises of my mouth as well. But if I get really close to the microphone, now you can hear all these disgusting mouth noises. You can kind of get the same effect with a compressor by letting the transients through and then setting the release on the faster side. You can bring up those mouth noises and bring up that little quiet detail of the vocal. And that'll make it more in your face, but more intimate too. If it's a quiet vocal, it'll sound like the person's talking in your ear a little bit. So how would I compress this Bowie vocal? Well, honestly, it's done pretty well. Probably for a like I should even talk about anything as wonderfully engineered as this particular track is. I feel I'm such an idiot. My God, it's Bowie, for God's sakes.
Though I'm past 100,000 miles, I'm
Well, it actually sounds pretty good right now. The initial pawn shop settings, honestly, they tend to be really, really good. Maybe somewhere in here.
feeling very still. Though I'm past 100,000 miles, I'm feeling very still.
I don't know if you can hear.
And
There's quite a volume difference.
I'm past 100,000 miles, I'm feeling very still.
Right, the release is making a big volume difference right there. I'm okay with it being in your face. Here's before.
Though I'm past 100,000 miles,
Here's
I'm feeling very still.
with the compressor turned off.
And I think my spaceship knows which way to go.
So, oh my gosh, the pawn shop. Even on a perfectly recorded Bowie vocal, it makes it a little better. One thing I want to emphasize real quick on this is that the on-off, even though it says power, what it's doing is switching off only the compressor. It is not switching off the preamp or anything on the other side. So I'm just using it to switch. It's not popping it out. That pops it out of circuit. That's a bypass. This is just basically turning the compressor off. Okay. So that's probably what I would do.
Though I'm past 100,000 miles, I'm feeling very still. And I think
the other way you could look at this is to maybe do some limiting. And that would be, rather than compressing the vocal completely like I'm doing now, you'd set it very fast. So you'd set everything kind of fast and then turn the threshold way up and set the ratio really high. This is like 18-1 or something, 16-1. And then I'm going to drop down the threshold until the meter jumps only when Bowie goes for those louder notes. So if he goes, though I'm past 100, and he pops that 100 out, the compressor kicks in there to hold things down a little bit. So we're not going to see a lot of effect with this, I think, because the vocal is already compressed. But let's see if we can get it to work that way. That's just another way to think of recording a vocal.
Though I'm past 100,000 miles, I'm feeling very still. And I think my spaceship knows which way to go. Tell my wife I love her very much.
You see, it's not really making a big difference, because even when he's really quiet, right here.
Tell my wife I love her very much.
If you look at the deflection on the meter.
Tell my wife I love her very much. She knows.
There's really not a huge difference between these two things. We're talking about peak energy versus RMS, and that's a whole other conversation that we're absolutely not going to have right now, because it'll drive you crazy, and it will drive me crazy, and I've spoken enough on this topic, I think, for today. But I hope that gives you guys some insight into what you might do with a compressor on a vocal, and an insight into how to think about compression. If there was one takeaway from this particular video, it would be that your attack control here is going to affect this area of a waveform, and your release is going to affect mainly this area of a waveform, or the in-betweens between sounds area of a waveform. And when I do some stuff with drums, and especially room mics, you'll really hear the release become the critical control. So that's it for now. If you have any questions, please post them up on Facebook. I'd be glad to help you out. Go make some great music. Go make good records. Stay inside. Don't spread the disease around, for God's sakes. And y'all be cool. Thanks for listening.